Have you ever lived a life where everyone was watching your every move, yet no one saw who you truly were? Listen to this gripping confession of a man who carried a secret so explosive it could destroy not just his life, but an entire community. In Millbrook, Maine, where pine trees outnumber people and everyone knows not just your name, but your business, I learned early that the walls had eyes. My name is Daniel Harper, and for 42 years I've been the keeper of a truth so carefully guarded that even now my hands shake as I prepare to share it. This isn't just my story. It's the story of a town built on appearances, of lives intertwined by secrets, and of the devastating cost of silence. Millbrook sits nestled against the Atlantic coast, the kind of postcard-perfect New England town that summer tourists photograph but never truly see. White-clappered houses with neatly trimmed lawns, a town square with a gazebo that hosts concerts every Sunday in summer, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor like patient horses. Beautiful, quaint, traditional, a place where generations of families have lived and died, where surnames carry weight and history, where the present is always measured against the past. I was born into Millbrook royalty, though we would never call it that. The Harpers had helped found the town in the 1800s, had been its mayors and business leaders, had donated land for the schools and churches. My father, Charles Harper, served as town council president for 25 years. My mother, Eleanor, chaired every committee worth chairing. We lived in the blue Victorian on Maple Street, the one with the wraparound porch and the rose garden that won awards. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. "Remember who you are," my father would tell me each morning before school, his hand heavy on my shoulder, his eyes serious beneath bushy eyebrows. "A Harper has responsibilities. The town is always watching." And watch they did. Miss Patterson noting what time I arrived at school and reporting back to my mother at church. Mr. Jenkins from the hardware store calling my father if I rode my bike too fast down Main Street. Mrs. Sullivan counting how many cookies I took at community events. In Millbrook, privacy was a foreign concept, surveillance a way of life. I learned to live under this microscope, to perform the role of Daniel Harper, eldest son of Charles and Eleanor, future keeper of the family legacy. I was an excellent student, a decent athlete, polite to my elders, kind to those less fortunate. I attended the right church, joined the right clubs, dated the right girls. I became adept at being exactly who everyone expected me to be, so adept that I almost convinced myself it was who I truly was. Almost. Because beneath the perfect surface, the Harper family harbored secrets dark enough to tarnish even our sterling reputation. Secrets I discovered the summer I turned 16, when I found the hidden key to my father's study drawer and the journal inside that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my town, and myself. That summer had started like any other in Millbrook. School let out in mid-June, and the population of our small town swelled as vacationers arrived, renting the cottages along the shore or staying at the Harbour Inn, our one claim to luxury accommodation. Local businesses that struggled through the winter suddenly thrived, and a carnival atmosphere pervaded the town. For teenagers like me, summer meant freedom. Limited freedom, to be sure, but still a loosening of the usual constraints. I had a summer job at Mason's Boatyard, helping maintain the fleet of sailboats and motorboats available for rent. It was good, honest work that my father approved of, though he would have preferred I intern at the bank where generations of Harper men had worked. But I had negotiated this small rebellion, wanting to spend my days on the water rather than behind a desk. It was at the boatyard that I first met Nathan Reynolds. He arrived in early June, driving a weather-beaten truck with New York plates, to take the position of sailing instructor that Mr. Mason advertised each year. Tall, with sun-bleached hair and an easy smile, Nathan immediately stood out in Millbrook. He spoke differently, moved differently, seemed to occupy space in a way that no one else in our town did. "You must be a harper," he said the first time. We met, extending a hand calloused from rope and salt water. "Mason said you'd be showing me the ropes." No pun intended. There was something in his eyes as he said my name, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even wariness, that struck me as odd. But I dismissed it, assuming he had simply been briefed on the town's important families. Over the next few weeks, Nathan and I fell into an easy working relationship. He was in his mid-20s, a college graduate who had decided to spend a few years living simply, as he put it, before settling into a career. He had sailed competitively in college and knew boats better than anyone I'd ever met. Under his guidance, I learned more in those first weeks than I had in years of casual sailing with my father. "You've got a natural feel for the water," he told me one afternoon as we brought in a small catamaran. "Not everyone does. It's like some people hear music and others just hear noise." His praise meant more to me than it should have, coming from a seasonal employee my father would consider beneath our family's station. But there was something about Nathan, his confidence, his experience of the world beyond Millbrook, his apparent freedom from the weight of expectation that I carried, that drew me to him. We began spending time together outside of work, though I was careful about being seen. Nathan was renting a small cabin at the edge of town, isolated enough that I could visit without the town gossips noting my comings and goings. We would sit on his porch in the evenings, drinking the beer he bought, though I was underage, and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Buffalo, about sailing in college, about the year he spent teaching English in Japan. I shared carefully edited stories of life in Millbrook, conscious even then of maintaining the Harper image. "You talk about this town like it's both paradise and prison," Nathan observed one night, the flickering porch light casting shadows across his face. "Love and hate all mixed up." "It's complicated," I replied, unable to explain the conflicting feelings I had about Millbrook and my place in it. "It's home, but sometimes I feel like I can't breathe here." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Small towns can be like that. Everyone in everyone else's business. No room to figure out who you really are." "Who I really am," I repeated, the words stirring something unnamed inside me. "I'm not sure I know any more." Nathan studied me for a long moment, then changed the subject, sensing perhaps that we were venturing into territory I wasn't ready to explore. But his question lingered in my mind, following me home that night, and into the quiet house where my parents were already asleep. Who was I, really, beneath the carefully constructed facade of Daniel Harper, dutiful son of Millbrook? The question haunted me as I moved through the dark house, restless and unsettled. I found myself in my father's study, a room I rarely entered without invitation. The leather-bound books, the heavy oak desk, the smell of pipe tobacco and furniture polish, everything about the space spoke of authority and tradition. I'm not sure what compelled me to try the desk drawer: curiosity, rebellion, or something deeper I couldn't yet name. Finding it locked was no surprise. My father was a private man despite our public life. What did surprise me was remembering the key, hidden in a hollowed-out book on maritime law that no one ever read. I had discovered it years earlier during a childhood game and forgotten until this moment. The drawer slid open silently, revealing the expected contents: financial statements, legal documents, the deed to our house. But beneath these ordinary papers lay a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age and use. I knew immediately that this was something I wasn't meant to see, something private even by normal standards, let alone my father's. I should have closed the drawer, should have respected the boundary, maintained the status quo, preserved the illusion of the Harper family that Millbrook so admired. Instead, I took the journal to the window seat, where moonlight provided just enough illumination to read without turning on a lamp that might wake my parents. The journal began 30 years earlier, when my father was a young man, newly returned to Millbrook after college, his handwriting so familiar. From birthday cards and notes in my school lunches, filled page after page with an intimacy I had never witnessed in person. He wrote of his dreams beyond Millbrook, his reluctance to join the family bank, his fear of disappointing his own father. And he wrote of Thomas Sullivan. The name was vaguely familiar, one of the fishing families that had been in Millbrook for generations, though never with the status of the Harpers or Masons. According to my father's journal, he and Thomas had been inseparable as children, despite the social gap between their families. Their friendship had survived my father's departure for college, sustained through letters and visits during breaks. But what I read next made the journal slip from my hands. I can no longer deny the truth, even to myself. What I feel for Thomas goes beyond friendship. Last night, as we sat watching the sunset from his boat, I finally found the courage to tell him. I expected disgust, anger, the end of everything between us. Instead, he took my hand and told me he had been waiting years to hear those words. We kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and for the first time in my life I felt truly whole. My father, Charles Harper, pillar of the community, deacon of First Baptist Church, the most straight-laced man I knew, had been in love with another man. The revelation was so at odds with everything I thought I knew that I wondered if I was misunderstanding, if the words meant something different in the context of 30 years ago. But as I continued reading, the truth became undeniable. For nearly 2 years, my father and Thomas Sullivan had carried on a secret relationship, meeting in hidden places, creating a private world within the fishbowl of Millbrook. They had dreams of leaving together, of building a life somewhere more accepting, and then disaster struck. Sullivan's boat rental burns to the ground. Arson suspected. T's father badly injured. The timing cannot be coincidence. Someone saw us, reported back to Douglas Sullivan. Now the whole town whispers, though no one dares speak directly. Father says there is only one way to quiet the rumors, to restore the Harper name. I'm to marry Eleanor Cambridge by Christmas. T refuses to speak to me, says I've chosen family over love. He doesn't understand. In Millbrook they are one and the same. There is no Daniel Harper without the Harper legacy. I read until dawn. Broke over the harbour, casting long shadows across my father's study. The journal chronicled his marriage to my mother, a business arrangement more than a love match, though he grew to respect and care for her. My birth a year later, a celebration, tinged with complex emotions, and the careful construction of the Harper family image that had shaped my entire existence. Thomas Sullivan had left Millbrook shortly after the fire, his family's business destroyed, his father an invalid. According to the final entries, he had settled in Portland, never married, rarely returned to his hometown. My father wrote of seeing him once, years later, at a regional banking conference. They had spoken briefly, formally, the gulf between them now unbridgeable. He looks well, successful. The angry young man has become someone steady, respected. We exchanged pleasantries like strangers, though his eyes still held the same light when he smiled. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, a different choice. But then he asked about Eleanor and Daniel, and reality returned. The path not taken remains just that, untraveled, unknown. I have my duty, my family, my place. It must be enough. That was the final entry about Thomas. The remaining pages detailed my father's increasing involvement in town politics, his careful stewardship of the Harper name, his determination that I would continue the legacy he had sacrificed so much to maintain. The weight of his expectations, already heavy, now seemed crushing as I understood their true origin. I returned the journal to its hiding place just as the house began to stir with morning routines. At breakfast, I couldn't look at my father, afraid he would see the knowledge in my eyes. This man I thought I knew completely, whose approval I had sought my entire life, suddenly seemed like a stranger, or rather, like two people occupying the same space. The public Charles Harper, and the private man who had buried his true self so deeply that even his son had never glimpsed it. "You look tired," my mother remarked, passing me the orange juice. "Were you up late reading again?" "Something like that," I managed, accepting the juice with hands that trembled slightly. My father lowered his newspaper, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had always made me feel transparent. "Everything all right, son? You seem distracted." "Fine," I assured him, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work. Mr. Mason mentioned possibly promoting me to assistant sailing instructor next summer if I keep improving." The sailing reference brought Nathan suddenly to mind, and with him an unsettling realization. Nathan Reynolds. Reynolds was my grandmother's maiden name, and Nathan had recognized the Harper name immediately, had seemed wary of it. Could he be? No, it was too coincidental, too contrived. And yet, in a town like Millbrook, where generations of secrets vested beneath polite surfaces, perhaps not impossible. That day at the boatyard, I watched Nathan with new eyes, searching for clues. His competence with boats, Sullivan's had been a boating business. His age, he could be Thomas Sullivan's son or perhaps nephew. His apparent knowledge of Millbrook, despite claiming never to have visited before, perhaps he had heard stories all his life. "You're staring," Nathan said, without looking up from the knot he was tying. "Do I have something on my face?" "Sullivan," I blurted out, the name escaping. Before I could reconsider, "Does that name mean anything to you?" His hands stilled, the rope suddenly forgotten. When he finally looked at me, his expression was carefully neutral. "Should it? There used to be a Sullivan's boat rental in Millbrook. Before my time. I just wondered if—" I trailed off, suddenly uncertain of what exactly I was asking. Nathan returned to his knot, his movements now precise, almost mechanical. "Thomas Sullivan was my uncle," he said after a long pause. "My mother's brother." The confirmation sent a jolt through me, though I had already half suspected the connection. "You knew who I was from the beginning," I said. "You came to Millbrook on purpose." He sighed, abandoning any pretense of work. "Yes and no. I knew about the Harpers, about what happened to my uncle's family business. When the job opening came up, I was curious about the town he rarely discussed. Meeting you wasn't planned. But when Mason said I'd be working with Charles Harper's son," he shrugged. "I was curious." "About what?" Nathan's eyes met mine, steady and searching. "About what kind of man would be raised by someone who chose convention over courage, who sacrificed love for status." The assessment of my father stung, though after reading the journal, I couldn't entirely disagree. "You don't know the whole story," I said defensively. "Do you?" he countered. I hesitated, the journal's revelations burning in my mind. How much? Should I share? What loyalty did I owe to my father's secrets, to the carefully maintained Harper image? "I know more than I did yesterday," I finally admitted. "But I'm still figuring it out." Nathan nodded, seeming to accept this partial answer. For what it's worth, my uncle never completely got over what happened here. It shaped his whole life, made him wary of commitment, of putting down roots. But he never spoke ill of your father, at least not to me. Just said they were young, and Millbrook was a hard place to be different. The simple statement encompassed so much: my father's impossible choice, the town's rigid expectations, the consequences that had rippled through decades and touched lives I never knew were connected to mine, including perhaps my own. Because as the summer progressed and my friendship with Nathan deepened, I began to recognize uncomfortable truths about myself. The way my pulse quickened when he clapped a hand on my shoulder, the jealousy I felt when he chatted with female tourists, the dreams that woke me confused and ashamed. I began to wonder if the legacy my father had passed down included more than just the Harper name and position. Nathan, for his part, maintained a careful distance despite our growing closeness. Whether out of respect for my age, my evident confusion, or the complicated history between our families, he never crossed the line from friendship to something more. But the possibility hung between us, unspoken but palpable, as August waned and his departure approached. "What will you do after the season ends?" I asked one evening at his cabin, where we sat drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Head back to Portland," he replied, rolling his bottle between his palms. "I've got a standing job offer at a sailing school there. Year-round work, good pay." Portland, where Thomas Sullivan had settled after leaving Millbrook. The connection was almost too perfect, the parallel to my father's story too exact. Was history repeating itself? Was I destined to face the same impossible choice? "I could visit," I suggested, my voice casual despite the significance of the offer. "Portland's not that far. Just a couple hours on the bus." Nathan studied me, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You could," he agreed. "But would you? With the whole town watching, noting your comings and goings, with your father wondering why his son is suddenly interested in weekend trips to the city." His questions laid bare the reality of my situation. The fishbowl of Millbrook, the weight of the Harper name, the expectations that hemmed me in on all sides. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming kinship with my father, understanding for the first time the true nature of his sacrifice. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to think I would, but Millbrook has a way of holding on to its own." Nathan finished for me, especially the ones with names like Harper. The summer ended, as summers do. Nathan returned to Portland, leaving behind a phone number I wasn't sure I would ever use, and questions I wasn't ready to answer. I returned to school for my junior year, sliding back into the role of perfect Harper son with practiced ease. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. I began to see Millbrook through new eyes, not as the idyllic community I'd been raised to revere, but as a place of rigid expectations and hidden judgments. I noticed how the town closed ranks against outsiders, how conformity was rewarded and difference subtly punished. I saw the same surveillance that had tracked my childhood now turned on others. The divorced mother whose dating life became town. Gossip. The new family whose different religious practices raised eyebrows. The teacher whose political views didn't align with local consensus. And I began to see my father differently too, not as the stern patriarch whose approval I had always sought, but as someone who had faced his own impossible choices, who had buried his true self to meet the expectations of family and community. I watched him at town functions, at church, at the dinner table, looking for glimpses of the young man who had loved Thomas Sullivan. Occasionally, I caught moments, a wistful expression as he gazed at the harbour, a certain softness when speaking of his youth, a sadness that seemed to have no obvious source. I never told him what I had found, never confronted him with his own past. Perhaps it was cowardice on my part, or perhaps a kind of respect for the life he had built from the ashes of his sacrifice. Instead, I carried his secret alongside my own emerging truth, the twin burdens growing heavier as the months passed. I didn't call Nathan that fall, or the winter that followed. But when summer approached again, I found myself hoping he would return to Mason's boatyard, giving me another chance to understand my complicated feelings. When Mr. Mason mentioned hiring a new sailing instructor, a knot formed in my stomach. Nathan wasn't coming back. "He took a full-time position in Portland," Mr. Mason explained, when I finally worked up the courage to ask. "Good for him. Those seasonal jobs are no way to build a future. Though he did ask after you, said to tell you the offer still stands, whatever that means." The message, cryptic to Mr. Mason, but crystal clear to me, revived the questions I'd been avoiding for months. What did I want my future to look like? Was I willing to live the same divided life my father had chosen, burying my true self to maintain appearances? Or was there another path, one that required more courage but promised greater authenticity? I graduated high school the following year, accepted to my father's alma mater as expected, prepared to follow the path laid out for me since birth. But as the summer before college began, the weight of unresolved questions became unbearable. I needed answers, needed to understand the choice my father had made before I potentially made the same one. That's how I found myself on a bus to Portland one June morning, a hastily packed bag at my feet and a slip of paper with Nathan's address in my pocket. I had told my parents I was visiting a friend from school, a half-truth that sat uncomfortably on my conscience, but seemed necessary. The journey felt momentous, as if I were crossing a threshold between my carefully managed past and an uncertain future. Portland was everything Millbrook wasn't: diverse, vibrant, anonymous. No one knew the Harper name here. No one watched my movements or reported back to my parents. The freedom was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Following the directions I'd gotten from information, I made my way to the address Nathan had given me, a renovated warehouse near the harbor that had been converted into apartments. He opened the door on my second knock, surprise giving way to genuine pleasure as he recognized me. "Daniel Harper," he said, stepping back to let me in. "I was beginning to think you'd never take me up on that invitation." His apartment was small but well-appointed, with large windows overlooking the water and walls lined with bookshelves. It felt like him, unpretentious, practical, yet with an underlying sophistication. I noted the single bedroom, the lack of feminine touches, and filed away the information without comment. "I needed to understand," I said, declining his offer of a drink, "about my father, about Thomas Sullivan, about what really happened in Millbrook." Nathan's expression turned serious. "That's a complicated story, and not really mine to tell." "Please," I pressed. "I found my father's journal. I know some of it, but not all, and I need to understand before I—" I trailed off, unable to articulate exactly what I was seeking. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Not here," he decided. "There's someone you should meet first." That's how I found myself face to face with Thomas Sullivan, the man whose existence had upended everything I thought I knew about my family. Now in his 50s, he had the same easy grace as his nephew, though tempered by years and experience. His hair had silvered at the temples, and lines framed eyes that assessed me with uncomfortable perception. "You look like him," were his first words to me, spoken in the quiet corner of a dockside restaurant where Nathan had brought me. "Same eyes, same way of holding yourself, like you're carrying the weight of expectations." I didn't know how to respond to the comparison, to the intimate knowledge it revealed of my father's mannerisms. "I found his journal," I said instead. "I know about what happened between you." Thomas exchanged a glance with Nathan, who nodded once and discreetly excused himself, leaving us alone with our shared history. "What exactly do you want to know, Daniel?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle but direct. "Everything," I replied honestly. "What he was like then. Why you never fought for him, I guess. Whether he's happy with the choice he made." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Your father was brilliant. Funny in a quiet way that surprised people, ambitious but kind with it. He wanted to succeed, but never at others' expense. He loved the water, hated being confined indoors, could name every constellation in the night sky." He smiled faintly at some private memory. "As for fighting for him, I did, in my way. But Millbrook wasn't a place where two men could build a life together, not then. Maybe not even now. The fire at my family's business made that clear enough." "You think someone deliberately burned it down because of you and my father?" The possibility had occurred to me after reading the journal, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach churn. "I know they did," Thomas replied, his voice hardening. "Never could prove it, but the timing was too perfect. 3 days after your grandfather caught us together, threatened to disown Charles if he didn't straighten up." The message couldn't have been clearer. The deliberate cruelty of it, destroying a family's livelihood, injuring an innocent man, shocked me despite growing up with Millbrook's capacity for judgment and exclusion. And after that, my father just gave in, married my mother, pretended to be someone he wasn't? Thomas's expression softened. "It wasn't that simple, Daniel. Charles had responsibilities, to his family name, to the business his father had built, to a community that depended on the bank the Harpers ran. Walking away would have meant abandoning all of that, disappointing people who had supported him his whole life. But he would have been true to himself," I argued, a hint of the anger I'd been suppressing coloring my voice. "Instead, he built his entire life on a lie, built my life on it too." "Did he?" Thomas challenged, gently. "I've followed your father's career from a distance, watched as he transformed Harper Bank from a conservative local institution into one that offers microloans to fishermen and small businesses that other banks won't touch. Seen how he's used his position on the town council to quietly improve conditions for those on the margins. Read about the scholarships he established that have sent dozens of Millbrook kids to college who couldn't otherwise afford it. Each example landed like a revelation, illuminating aspects of my father's work I had taken for granted. I had known about these initiatives, of course, but had never connected them to his personal history, to the empathy born of his own difficult choices. "He chose convention," Thomas continued, "but he's spent his life pushing at its boundaries, making space within traditional structures for those who don't quite fit. That's its own kind of courage, its own kind of truth." I sat back, absorbing this reframing of my father's life. "Are you saying he made the right choice? That he should have chosen Millbrook over you?" Thomas smiled sadly. "I'm saying there was no right choice, only different sacrifices. I left, built a life on my own terms, found freedom but also a certain rootlessness. Charles stayed, accepted constraints, but found ways to effect change from within. Neither path was perfect." "And now?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for months finally finding voice. "If you had to choose again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?" Thomas was silent for a long time, his gaze drifting to the harbor, where boats bobbed on the evening tide. "I would have been more patient," he finally said, "less absolute in my demands. Your father needed time I wasn't willing to give him. By the time I understood that, it was too late for us." His words settled between us, weighted with regret but also wisdom. I thought of Nathan, waiting discreetly at the bar, giving me space to have this conversation. Of my father, who had no idea where I was or the truths I was uncovering. Of Millbrook, watching and waiting for the next generation of Harpers to assume their prescribed role. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What would you tell me to do?" Thomas reached across the table, briefly covering my hand with his own. "I would tell you to be braver than we were, but also kinder to yourself than I was to your father. The world has changed, Daniel. There are more possibilities now, more ways to be true to yourself without sacrificing everything else you value." I returned to Millbrook the next day, carrying more questions than answers, but also a new understanding of the complex legacy I had inherited. I spent the remaining weeks before college watching my father with new eyes, seeing beyond the stern facade to the man beneath. A man who had made difficult choices, but had found ways to remain true to his values, even within the constraints he had accepted. College offered a freedom I had never experienced before, a chance to explore aspects of myself I had carefully suppressed in Millbrook. I joined the sailing team, excelling in the sport Nathan had taught me to love. I studied, business as expected, but added a minor in environmental science, thinking of Nathan's uncle and his thwarted dreams. And I cautiously began dating men, discovering that the feelings I had tried to ignore were an essential part of who I was. Each vacation, I returned to Millbrook, playing the role of dutiful Harper son while home, but increasingly living my truth. While away, it was an uneasy compromise, one that echoed my father's divided existence, but without the complete denial he had forced upon himself. Nathan and I stayed in touch, our friendship deepening over time, though we never crossed the line, into romance, the shadow of our family's history, perhaps too complicated to overcome. It was during my senior year of college that everything changed again. My father suffered a mild heart attack, not life-threatening, but serious enough to force him to reduce his workload. I returned home immediately, prepared to assume temporary responsibility at the bank as the Harper heir. Sitting beside his hospital bed, watching the monitors track his steady heartbeat, I was struck by his vulnerability. This man who had loomed so large in my life, whose approval I had sought and whose secrets I had discovered, suddenly seemed mortal, fallible, human in a way I had never fully acknowledged before. "You didn't have to rush back," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still carrying that note of authority. "The doctors say I'll make a full recovery." "Of course I came," I replied, uncomfortable with the emotion tightening my throat. "You're my father." He studied me with the penetrating gaze I had known all my life, but now I met it evenly, a man of 22 rather than the boy who had once feared his judgment. "You've changed," he observed. "College has been good for you." "I've grown up," I said simply, unwilling to detail exactly how I had changed, the truths I had embraced while away from Millbrook's watchful eye. Something in my tone must have alerted him, because his expression shifted, becoming more intent. "Daniel," he began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. Something important." My heart rate increased, matching the quickened beeps on his monitor. Was this it? After all these years, was my father finally going to share the truth I had discovered in his journal? "I've been thinking about the future of Harper Bank," he continued, dashing my momentary hope. "About your place in it." I nodded, prepared for the familiar discussion about my eventual role in the family business. But what he said next caught me completely off guard. "I want you to know that it's your choice," he said, each word careful and deliberate. "Whether to return to Millbrook after graduation, whether to join the bank, all of it. Your life is yours to shape, not mine to dictate." The unexpected freedom of his statement left me momentarily speechless. All my life, the expectation of following in his footsteps had been absolute, unquestioned. "What brought this on?" I finally managed to ask. He sighed, looking suddenly older than his 54 years. "Mortality has a way of clarifying priorities. Makes a man think about the legacy he's leaving, not just in business, but in the lives he's touched." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window where Millbrook Harbor was visible in the distance. "I don't want you living with regrets, Daniel, making choices based on what others expect rather than what will bring you fulfillment." The irony of this advice, coming from a man who had done exactly that, was almost too much to bear. Before, I could consider the wisdom of my words, they escaped, like you did with Thomas Sullivan. The monitor's steady beep faltered, then resumed at a faster pace. My father's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. For several heartbeats, neither of us spoke, the name hanging between us like a ghost finally given voice. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. Since I was 16, I admitted, relief at finally speaking the truth mingling with anxiety about his reaction. I found your journal. Read enough to understand what happened, why you made the choice you did. He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. All this time you've known, and never said anything. Neither did you, I pointed out, the words sharper than intended. No, he acknowledged. I didn't. I thought I was protecting you, protecting our family name, maintaining the life I had chosen, for better or worse. He looked at me directly, his gaze unwavering despite the emotion visible in his eyes. I've often wondered if it was worth it. The sacrifice, the denial of who I truly was. Was it? I asked, the question that had haunted me since discovering his secret. He was silent for a long moment, considering. Parts of it, he finally said. You, your mother, who deserved better but has been a good partner in her way. The work I've been able to do in Millbrook, using the Harper influence to effect changes that matter, he sighed. But the cost was high, Daniel. Higher than I sometimes think I could bear if I allowed myself to truly feel it. The admission, so honest and vulnerable from a man who had always presented strength and certainty, moved me deeply. I met him, I confessed. Thomas and his nephew Nathan, who worked at Mason's boatyard 2 summers ago. If possible, my father looked even more shocked than before. You sought them out? Nathan found me, in a way, I explained. Came to Millbrook curious about the town his uncle rarely discussed. We became friends. He introduced me to Thomas last year when I was trying to understand everything, the choices you made, the choices I might have to make. Understanding dawned in my father's eyes, followed quickly by a complex mixture of concern and resignation. You're like me, he said softly, in that way too. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, the simple acknowledgement both terrifying and liberating. Yes, and you've been hiding it just as I did. From Millbrook, yes, I admitted, but not at college, not completely. He absorbed this, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. And now you're facing the same choice I did. Return to Millbrook, take your place at the bank, maintain appearances, or choose a different path, one that allows you to live your truth, but means leaving behind the Harper legacy. It doesn't have to be the same choice, I argued, thinking of Thomas Sullivan's words in Portland. Times have changed. Millbrook has changed, at least somewhat. And I'm not engaged to a woman, not trapped by circumstances the way you were. My father smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in his eyes. You're right, of course. The world has changed, even if Millbrook lags behind. And you're your own man, Daniel, with strengths I never possessed. He reached for my hand, the gesture, unusually demonstrative for him. Whatever you decide, know that I will support you. Your happiness matters more to me than appearances, than tradition, than anything else. The words I had needed to hear my entire life, offered now when I least expected them. Tears pricked my eyes, and I gripped his hand tightly, overcome by emotion I couldn't fully express. There's something else, my father continued, his voice stronger now despite the vulnerability of the moment. Something I should have done years ago but lacked the courage. What? I asked, unsure what more revelations this day could possibly hold. I want to make amends to Thomas, to apologize for my part in what happened to his family's business, for choosing security over love. He looked at me directly, determination replacing the earlier uncertainty. Will you help me arrange a meeting? When I'm released from here, of course. The request stunned me, representing as it did a complete reversal of the careful separation my father had maintained for decades. Are you sure? After all this time? That's precisely why I'm sure, he replied. Too many years have already been wasted on pride and fear. This heart attack has shown me how fragile life is, how quickly opportunities can vanish. I don't want to leave this world with that particular regret still weighing on me. In that moment, I saw my father not as the imposing figure of my childhood, or the man with the painful secret I had discovered, but as someone on his own journey, still evolving, still seeking to right past wrongs. It was a humbling and humanizing realization. I'll help, I promised, though I can't guarantee Thomas will agree to meet. All I can do is offer the apology, my father said. Whether he accepts it is his choice. 2 weeks later, fully recovered from his heart attack but changed in less tangible ways, my father drove us to Portland. He insisted on making the journey himself rather than asking Thomas to come to Millbrook, a small acknowledgement of the harm done decades ago. I had arranged the meeting through Nathan, who reported that his uncle was cautious but willing, a response that spoke volumes about the feelings Thomas still harbored after all these years. We met at the same dockside restaurant where I had first spoken with Thomas, though this time we sat at an outdoor table overlooking the harbor. The late September day was perfect, summer's last gasp before autumn fully claimed New England. I watched my father's face as Thomas approached, saw the complex emotions that crossed it, recognition, sorrow, a flash of something that might have been love, buried but not extinguished by time. "Charles," Thomas greeted him, his voice steady, though his eyes revealed his own emotional struggle. "You're looking well, all things considered." "Heart attacks have a way of aging a man," my father replied with a small smile. "But I'm recovering. Thank you for agreeing to meet." I excused myself after the initial introductions, giving them privacy for a conversation 3 decades overdue. From a distance, I watched them. 2 men in their 50s, sitting across from each other at a small table, the weight of shared history and divergent paths between them. Their conversation lasted hours, intense at times judging by their expressions and gestures, softening gradually as the afternoon waned. Nathan found me waiting at the bar, his presence a comfort as I wondered what reconciliation might be occurring. "Outside, whatever happens," he said, nodding toward our uncles, "they're braver now than they were then. That counts for something." By the time my father and Thomas rejoined us, something had shifted between them. Not the rekindling of an old romance. Too much time had passed, too many separate lives had been built for that. But a genuine peace, a laying down of burdens too long carried. "Thomas has agreed to visit Millbrook," my father announced, surprising me with the development, "to help consult on a new marina project the town council is considering." The professional pretext fooled neither Nathan nor me, but we nodded as if this were simply a business arrangement rather than a monumental step in healing old wounds. The Sullivan expertise with boats was always unmatched, my father continued, a hint of his old formality returning, though tempered now with genuine warmth. It's time Millbrook benefited from that again. What followed over the next year transformed not only my father and Thomas, but Millbrook itself in subtle but significant ways. Thomas's consulting role expanded, bringing him to town regularly. Initially, his presence caused whispers and raised eyebrows. The prodigal Sullivan returned after decades away, working closely with Charles Harper, despite the ancient animosity between their families. But as months passed, the novelty faded, replaced by acceptance of what appeared to be a professional partnership bridging old divides. Only a few knew the full truth. My mother, who had apparently suspected aspects of my father's past but had made her own peace with their complicated marriage. Nathan, who divided his time between Portland and the revitalized Millbrook Marina. And me, watching in amazement as my father gradually, carefully began living with greater authenticity. Not that Charles Harper suddenly declared his true nature to Millbrook. The decades of careful public presentation didn't vanish overnight, but small changes accumulated. His friendship with Thomas conducted in the open rather than hidden. His increasing advocacy for inclusivity in town policies. His quiet support when the high school's first gay-straight alliance formed amid predictable controversy. As for me, I made my own choice after graduation. Not a complete rejection of Millbrook or the Harper legacy, but not a wholesale embrace of tradition either. I returned to the bank, but with conditions: freedom to modernize operations, to expand our community investment, to use the Harper influence as my father had, pushing at boundaries from within. And gradually, carefully, I began living my own truth in my hometown, no longer hiding essential parts of myself to maintain appearances. The surveillance that had defined my childhood continued. Millbrook still watched the Harpers, still noted our comings and goings, still measured us against expectations established generations ago. But now we watched back, challenged the unspoken rules, created space within tradition for authenticity and truth. It hasn't been easy. There have been costs to this partial unveiling. Business lost from conservative clients, invitations that no longer arrive, church members who find seats across the aisle rather than beside us. But there have been unexpected gains as well. Deeper connections with those who remain, newfound respect from younger generations, the profound relief of living with fewer secrets and lies. Thomas Sullivan never moved back to Millbrook permanently. His life too established in Portland for such a dramatic change. But he visits regularly, a welcome presence at Harper family gatherings that would have been unimaginable just years ago. He and my father have forged a new relationship, not the passionate romance of their youth, but a deep friendship built on shared history, mutual respect, and the wisdom that comes from lives fully lived. As for Nathan and me, our story is still unfolding. The shadow of our family's history creates a complexity that we navigate carefully, conscious of not merely repeating the past in modern form, but there is love there, growing stronger as we find our own path, distinct from but informed by what came before. Millbrook itself has changed, if incrementally, still traditional, still watchful, but perhaps more willing to expand its definition of acceptable lives and loves. The entire village still watches, but now they see more of the truth. Not everything, not all at once, but more than the careful performance that sustained the Harper image for generations. I am 42 years old now, the same age my father was when I discovered his journal and began unraveling the complex legacy I'd inherited. The blue Victorian on Maple Street still stands, though my parents have downsized to a smaller home near the harbour, where my father and Thomas often sail together in a boat they co-own, a small but significant reclaiming of joys long denied. I live in the family home now, its rooms gradually being reimagined, its history honoured but not constraining. The secret drawer in my father's study remains, though it no longer contains hidden journals or buried truths. Instead, it holds mementos of our journey, photographs of 4 men, 2 young, 2 older, standing together on Portland's harbour, the key to the Sullivans' new marina office, newspaper clippings documenting subtle but meaningful changes in Millbrook's civic life. Sometimes, in the evening, I sit on the wraparound porch where generations of Harpers have watched over Millbrook, and Millbrook has watched back. I think about secrets and truths, about appearances and reality, about the weight of expectations and the freedom of authenticity. I think about my father's courage, not just in finally acknowledging his past, but in the years of working within constraints to effect change where possible. I think about Thomas's resilience, his capacity for forgiveness after decades of hurt. And I think about the village that raised me, with all its flaws and virtues, its judgments and occasional mercies. The entire village was watching us, but no one knew the truth. Until gradually they did, not all of it, but enough. Enough to begin breaking cycles of secrecy and shame. Enough to create space for more authentic lives. Enough to suggest that tradition and truth need not be opposing forces. So I ask you, what would you have done in my father's place or in mine? Chosen security and belonging at the cost of your true self, rejected tradition entirely in favor of authenticity, or attempted, as we have, to find a middle path, honoring the past while refusing to be imprisoned by it, acknowledging community while insisting on the right to define yourself within it? There are no perfect answers, no choices without consequences. But there is power in speaking truth, even partially, even gradually. There is healing in reconciliation, even decades delayed. And there is hope in the knowledge that villages, like the people who comprise them, can evolve, slowly, reluctantly perhaps, but meaningfully nonetheless. The entire village is still watching, but now, increasingly, they see us as we truly are. And in that visibility, imperfect though it remains, we have found a freedom that secrets never allowed,